I'm going to show you a game from the first round of the FIDE World Cup taking place in Khanty-Mansiysk in Siberia. I love the FIDE World Cup. It's really one of my favourite events in the whole kind of calendar. Why? Because, well, first of all, there's a massive prize at the end of it. The two finalists get to qualify for the candidates tournament next spring. Second, I just love the format. So you've got 128 players. It's a knockout tournament. In each mini match, one player definitely goes through. And because it's very democratic, so you have players from all over the world, and you have, you know, top players there, but you have much weaker players. You have younger players who can make their name. So, you know, I'm very interested to see how Firuja gets on, for example, Artemyev, well, many others. It's just fascinating to see who, you know, breaks through into the front ranks, or, you know, who makes their name. So anyway, I'm going to start with a game between Sugar Gan-Erdene, who's a young player from Mongolia, a teenager. I think he's just 16 years old. I'm sure someone out there will correct me if I'm wrong. And he has white against Yan Nepomniachtchi from Russia. Now, just recently, he had a real up and down tournament in the Sinquefield Cup. So let's see if he's managed to stabilise himself. Of course, he's a hot favourite in this match against Gan-Erdene, who he's a 2400 player. Okay, for a teenager, it's still decent, but of course, Nepomniachtchi is a huge favourite. So it's a Najdorf, which I always like to see, always fascinating struggles. And it's interesting that Gan-Erdene has a particular system that he's a bit of a specialist in. So bishop e3, very normal. Bishop e7, the normal move, of course. And now not f3 or queen d2, those are normal, but instead h3 to cover g4. Now, we saw something very similar to this in the game between Caruana and Nepomniachtchi in the Sinquefield Cup. So this is kind of related, and, well, we'll hear more about that game in a second. So one of the ideas with h3 and not f3 is that this queen is able to reach quite an active square. White is looking to control lots of light squares in this position. So it's a slightly different strategy to the standard f3 and g4 pawn storm. And I noticed that Gan-Erdene has previously played this and faced knight d7 a couple of times and has 2 wins with this. But Nepo plays castles kingside here, which is the most common move. And there's a good reason for delaying the development of this queen's knight, which we're about to see. Shirov has played this before with white. He's got g4 here, but castle's the more normal move, and, well, it can transpose, of course. So b5. Nepo launches the queenside pawns, and why not? Because these knights can be hit, and you can start a pawn storm to open lines against the king. And white starts on the other side of the board, and b4. Consistent. Just try and seize the initiative. The knight hops into d5. Now, if bishop takes, then white is going to be able to push that knight on f6 away. So instead, Nepo takes, bishop attacked, and it goes all the way back to c8. Now this might look a bit funny, it's just come from c8, but actually this makes a lot of sense because the bishop is going to bounce out either to b7 or probably a6 after a5. Also, exchanging off the knight on f6 means that black doesn't have to deal with this pawn move g5, very annoying. So in a way, these white kingside pawns are kind of, well, they're not hitting anything at the moment. So it feels as though, for the time being, black's king is pretty safe here, whereas white's, Well, it's got to deal with this pawn advance in a second. And I have to say, if I were white here, I think I would preempt this and perhaps play king b1 and knight d2 or knight c1, probably knight d2, more active, and then bring the knight around here. But certainly putting the king on b1 feels like the right move to me, considering that white's attack really isn't going anywhere for the time being. But bishop d3 came. Of course, it's not a bad square for the bishop, but you know, maybe this bishop doesn't need to commit itself yet. So a5 is possible. Nepo played knight d7, and on the next turn a5. And again here, I think king b1 or knight d2 feel like the right way to go. But rook g1 played after almost a 20-minute think. a5, there we go. This pawn has been desperate to advance down the board for a few moves now. When the knight is on b3, it's kind of, well, you know, you're going to gain a tempo to slam that pawn down the board. Why not? Let's go for it. King b1 has been played before here, but knight d2 finally gets played. And now Nepo went with queen c7. And again, I want to play king b1 and get that king away from the c-file, but instead bishop b5, and I think this is a mistake. You know, we've seen this bishop move once here and now twice here, and it's too much. This is a bit fiddly because, well, of course, in theory, it would be nice to sink this bishop on c6, but actually it's not a stable square, as we're about to see. So bishop a6, of course, it's nice to exchange and perhaps get the rook to the c-file. Bishop c6. Okay, so this is an idea. Rook c8. Yeah, king's at the end of the pile of the queen and the rook, so finally nudges out the way. And now Nepo just comes back. Bishop b7. Now, it is possible to exchange off here, because after bishop takes, well, actually queen takes, it's only one check. So after bishop takes, queen takes, but white's wasted so much time with that bishop, and actually, you know, c2 is a little bit vulnerable here. Even the d5 pawn sometimes could be hit. And don't forget a4 coming as well. Well, black has very nice play on the queen side. So after bishop b7, now this is interesting. I quite like this move, knight c4. So he's getting a bit creative. So really this bishop has to be eliminated. And now I think Nepo kind of overthinks it a little bit, actually. I don't see there's anything wrong with just exchanging off queens here. Now, pawns are level, but I think black has the advantage here. First, I like the centre pawns, but I like advancing this pawn to f6, putting the king on e6 to support the d pawn and maybe at some stage threaten to advance. And there's always the possibility to hit the a file as well. It just feels to me this is one of those classic Najdorf positions that I always loved playing. I've always said the Najdorf, in my opinion, is a very positional opening. You know, you use your centre pawns to later on in the game control that centre and, you know, force pawns through the middle. Feels like a nice position for black, but Nepo very ambitious here. He was looking for a quick knockout, and he played knight b8. I think it's a dubious move. But let's see. Here we have queen d5 from Gan-Erdene. I think he's got a good move here, and that's knight b6. Hitting the rook. So queen takes pawn. So obviously knight takes rook, queen takes queen. But then queen f5. Now that's the kind of move that is very easy to overlook. Defending the c-pawn. The knight attacks the rook. So let's say the rook moves, and then we bring the knight back to d5. Black is a pawn up, but white has very nice compensation here. That knight can't be touched for the time being. That bishop not looking great. well, I think we can just say that white has excellent positional compensation here. But instead, queen d5. Knight takes d6. So here, Gan-Erdene recaptures the pawn. He still has some compensation if he plays b3 and closes things. Although, you know, after a4, well, you know, I would take black any day in this position because, you know, white's king isn't as secure as other lines. Yes, he's got a bit of a clamp in the middle, but somehow I feel that black can shake this one. Okay, let's come back here. So instead of playing b3, which does give some compensation, he took on d6, but I'm afraid he's overlooked a bit of a crunch reply from Nepo. Maybe he'd only looked at rook d8, but then white escapes from the pin with knight b5. But instead, Nepo played a great move here. b3. That is a beautiful move. Classic Najdorf. So the big point is it basically makes room for the knight to hit b4. So if that's taken with the a pawn, then knight b4, c pawn, knight b4, and suddenly white is in massive trouble. So white played c3 to cover the b4 square. But watch what happens now. First of all, exchanging these pawns, white's king is opening up, and now bishop takes knight. Of course, not the endgame, but knight b4 check. This is a beautiful idea. I mean, this knight has to be taken. If the king comes back, queen c4 is very similar to the game. So pawn takes knight, queen c4 check. If b3, then the queen checks here, and then the a file opens. With this, it's over. So king a1, and pawn takes pawn. So black is a piece down, but the a file is open. Now, I mentioned this game Caruana against Nepomniachtchi from the Sinquefield Cup earlier, and you might remember that in that game Nepo missed a beautiful checkmating idea, and again it was about, well, there was a b pawn and it was about opening up this a file here. Well, in this game Nepo makes no mistake at all. It's deadly. It's really beautiful. Let's have a look. So obviously the rook wants to come over, and that looks pretty nasty. So queen d5. And the idea is that if there's a check, basically it's not possible to play queen a2 because the queen is covering. But Nepo plays queen c2. He calculated this extremely well. So preventing the king coming to b1. Obviously now rook a8 would be fatal. So queen a5. So rook a8 anyway, and white blocks with bishop a7. Okay, so white has found some kind of defense here. How does black make progress? Well, first of all, this next move is absolutely key. b3. You have to do this before anything else. And the point is that it sets up mating threats, not just on the a file, but actually on the back rank as well. Okay, so first of all, let's see, for example, rook c1. So what happens if white tries to drive this queen away? Well, we play queen takes pawn, and if bishop takes, we play rook takes, and there we are. Next turn, rook a1 mate. It's all because of that pawn there. So let's come back. So black has just played b3. So queen a3. Rook c8. Now that means that if rook c1. That's my phone. I'm just going to stop that. Sorry about that. I'd be disqualified under FIDE rules. So queen takes c1 check. And that is mate. I just lost my train of thought just for a little moment there. Apologies. So, back here, black has just played the rook to c8. And white is actually completely defenseless now. In fact, I really like the way Nepo does it. After rook e1, he could have played rook c7 here, but he just played h6. What a cool move. Just make sure that his king has an escape square. In fact, it's not necessary, but hey, he's flexing here. He's just saying, okay, you can't do anything. The rooks can't move off the back rank because there'll be queen c1 and mate. f3 played. Rook c7, there we go. He's going for the kill. Bishop c5. There's nothing better. Nepo takes the queen. And rook a7. So obviously black is winning this. He's got a queen against rook and a bishop, but that just finishes the game beautifully. A check, and here white resigned. Yeah, rook takes bishop and queen a2 happening shortly. So there you go. Nepo seems to have learnt from his miss in the Sinkfield Cup a couple of weeks ago. So, over the next few weeks, we have a real feast of chess coming. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to be trying to report as much as possible because there's going to be so much interesting chess, so many interesting players. So, you can look forward to more videos coming your way. Thanks for watching.